No one expects a quiet suburban driveway to become the center of a battle that would divide an entire neighborhood. No one imagines that a single parked car could expose how fragile fairness really is when power goes unchecked. But one morning, in a community where rules were enforced more strictly than kindness, an ordinary homeowner walked outside and realized his life had just been turned into a warning example. A car blocked his driveway completely, placed there with deliberate confidence by someone who believed authority protected her from consequences. What followed wasn't just an argument about parking. It became a fight over control, reputation, and the question every homeowner eventually faces: what happens when the people enforcing the rules decide they don't apply to themselves? The neighborhood looked perfect from the outside. Tree-lined streets, curved around, identical homes, painted in carefully approved colors. Lawns were trimmed to uniform heights, mailboxes matched, and sidewalks stayed spotless. The Homeowners Association promoted the community as a model of order and harmony, a place where property values stayed high because standards were strictly maintained. Daniel Harper had moved there 3 years earlier, seeking stability after a long period of uncertainty. At 38, he valued quiet routines and predictable days. He worked remotely as an IT consultant, which meant most of his time was spent at home, surrounded by the calm he had intentionally chosen. The neighborhood felt safe, organized, and peaceful, exactly what he wanted. He followed the HOA rules carefully. Trash bins went out only at approved hours. Landscaping stayed neat. Exterior lights matched community guidelines. Daniel wasn't trying to stand out. He simply wanted to live comfortably without conflict. At first, the HOA felt distant and mostly invisible. Monthly emails arrived with reminders about seasonal decorations or lawn maintenance. Nothing unusual for a managed community. Residents waved politely during evening walks, and disputes seemed non-existent. One name appeared frequently in HOA communications: Linda Carver. Linda served as the association's enforcement chair, a role that gave her authority to monitor violations and issue citations. She was known throughout the neighborhood for her constant presence, walking streets with a clipboard, photographing properties, reminding residents about compliance. Some admired her dedication. Others quietly avoided her. Daniel's first interaction with Linda had been brief and polite, a reminder about a recycling bin left visible too long. He corrected it immediately, assuming that was the end of it. But over time, her attention toward his property seemed to increase. Small notices began appearing. A warning about hedge height that differed by inches. A reminder regarding driveway markings that no other neighbor received. Each issue felt minor, yet the frequency created unease. Daniel complied every time, believing cooperation would resolve whatever concern existed. Instead, the scrutiny intensified. Then came the morning everything changed. Daniel stepped outside with his coffee and froze. A silver sedan sat directly across his driveway entrance, blocking it completely. There was no space to exit, no visible attempt to park considerately. The placement felt intentional. The vehicle belonged to Linda. At first, Daniel assumed it was temporary. Maybe maintenance work or a short visit nearby. He waited. 30 minutes passed, then an hour. His scheduled appointment approached, and frustration replaced patience. He contacted the HOA using the official reporting process, expecting a simple resolution. The response shocked him. The HOA informed him that Linda was conducting community enforcement duties and that temporary parking exceptions were permitted under operational authority. No timeline was provided. No apology offered. Daniel stared at the message, trying to understand how blocking a resident's driveway could qualify as enforcement work. Hours passed before the car moved. The next day, a violation notice appeared in his mailbox, citing him for improper communication with HOA leadership and warning of escalating penalties for non-cooperative behavior. Confusion turned into concern. Daniel reviewed community bylaws carefully and found nothing allowing board members to obstruct private property access. He submitted a formal appeal, attaching photos and timestamps. Instead of resolution, fines followed. Each notice carried increasing penalties. Language grew sharper, framing him as disruptive. Emails went unanswered. Requests for meetings were delayed repeatedly. What had begun as inconvenience evolved into pressure. Neighbors noticed, but remained silent. Some offered sympathetic looks, yet avoided involvement. The HOA's authority discouraged confrontation, and most residents preferred peace over participation. Daniel felt increasingly isolated. Then another incident occurred. Linda parked near his driveway again during what she described as an inspection. Though not fully blocking access this time, the message felt clear: authority allowed behavior others would never risk. Daniel installed a small security camera facing his driveway, hoping documentation would protect him. Within days, another violation arrived accusing him of installing unauthorized surveillance equipment. The pattern became undeniable. Every attempt to defend himself triggered another penalty. Finis accumulati rapidly. A certified letter warned that continued non-compliance could result in a lien against his property. Fear replaced frustration. A lien threatened not just finances, but ownership itself. Daniel realized this conflict was no longer about parking. It had become a demonstration of control. He began documenting everything meticulously: timestamps, photographs, emails, and notices. Late nights were spent researching HOA governance laws and homeowner rights. The deeper he looked, the more inconsistencies he discovered. Rules existed, but enforcement appeared selective. Then a turning point arrived. While reviewing public HOA records, Daniel noticed multiple complaints filed years earlier against enforcement practices that quietly disappeared without resolution. Patterns mirrored his own experience. Escalating fines following personal disagreements. He wasn't the first. Armed with evidence, Daniel requested a formal hearing before the board, triggering procedures that required documentation review under legal oversight. The hearing changed everything. Instead of emotional confrontation, the process unfolded through evidence. Photos displayed the blocked driveway. Email timelines revealed unanswered appeals. Financial records showed penalties issued faster than allowed under HOA guidelines. Linda maintained that enforcement authority justified her actions. But documentation told a different story. Board members began asking questions, not about Daniel's compliance, but about enforcement procedures themselves. For the first time, uncertainty appeared within the leadership structure. The hearing concluded without immediate judgment, but something had shifted. The conflict was no longer personal. It had become institutional. Days later, the HOA announced an independent audit of enforcement actions. Silence followed. No new fines arrived. Communication paused. The neighborhood watched quietly as attorneys reviewed years of records. Residents began sharing stories. Similar experiences surfaced, minor disputes escalating into costly penalties. What once seemed isolated now appeared systemic. The audit findings confirmed widespread procedural violations. Enforcement actions lacked consistency. Documentation showed authority sometimes used in personal disputes. Linda stepped down pending investigation. All fines against Daniel were rescinded. The threatened lien disappeared. The HOA issued formal acknowledgement that enforcement standards had not been followed properly. Relief came slowly. The driveway returned to normal. Mornings regained routine. Stress that once lingered daily began fading. Community reforms followed. Independent review became mandatory for violations. Meetings were recorded. Transparency replaced assumption. Participation increased as residents realized governance required involvement, not blind trust. Months later, Linda quietly sold her home and left the neighborhood. Daniel never sought revenge. What mattered was balance restored. Neighbors began talking openly again. HOA meetings shifted tone from enforcement to collaboration. Compliance improved because rules felt fair rather than punitive. Standing in his driveway one evening, Daniel reflected on how small the original problem had seemed, just a car parked in the wrong place. Yet that moment exposed how easily authority could drift without accountability. The real outcome wasn't humiliation or victory. It was change. Because communities aren't protected by rules alone. They're protected by people willing to question how those rules are used. And sometimes, all it takes to restore fairness is one person refusing to move out of the way when power expects silence.